Okay everybody, welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to talk a little bit about switches. This is one from my Austin Healey. It is the overdrive switch, and what's supposed to happen is you turn it on and off, it'll turn the overdrive on and off. And what a switch is actually doing, think about it, you've got two wires, okay? One's going to be positive, one negative, at least in a DC system. AC is a little bit different, and when the switch is in the off position, you have those wires are disconnected. So if you're trying to power a bulb or an overdrive in this case, you have power, but it's not going to the thing that you were trying to power because the wires are separated. Turn the switch on, what you're doing is you're connecting those wires. So now power can get from one to the other. You've got a complete circuit, and whatever it is that you're trying to turn on gets turned on. Turn the switch off again, you are breaking that contact. And so that's really all that this is supposed to be doing. Now we can measure that with our multimeter here, and you'll want to go to any of the ohm settings, upside down horseshoe here. I know it's got a name, math people, but that's not who this channel is for. And any of these will work. This one's technically for testing diodes, that'd work. And then you've got this one, which if my multimeter is working, will make a sound. It is not working, but you can see it goes to 0. Okay, so 0 means that there is no resistance. 1 means that the wires aren't connected. There's infinite resistance. Okay, so what we should see, the switch is in the off position now. If I touch the contacts to both sides of the switch, there is infinite resistance. That would make perfect sense because the switch is of course off. If I turn the switch on, you would expect to see 0. However, we are not seeing 0. And the reason we're not seeing 0 is because this switch is not working. I have never opened up an overdrive switch like this, so we're going to do it together on the channel and see if we can make it work. Okay, so on this particular switch, the one that I've replaced it with has this on-off tag. That's clearly not going to be original to Healey's, but I left it there so I would know which side was which. It's actually on a overdrive switch on a Healey, it's got a little tab that fits into the off side. Anyway, so you've got these two nuts basically lock it in place so that it hits the right place in the dash. It's not part of it technically. Okay, looks like what we need to do, there's a rivet here and there, and I see a little pin going through the center. That looks like that might be the point the switch pivots around, so we probably need to knock that out too. But let's open it up and see what we see. There we go. One side done. When you're drilling out rivets, all you really need to do is just get the squished part out. They're usually soft, so you can drill them slow. Seeing what I'm seeing for the first time here. Try and keep all the parts in order. I was right about the pivot point, see? Move the switch up and down, it's just moving that lever. It's like a little bit more drilling here. Oh, no, never mind, I got it. A couple of insulator pieces. I can't zoom in anymore, but that's okay. Spring to keep pressure on it. pair of pliers at this point. Got this little guy here. That could be part of the rivet. Little cup. That rolls on the inside. And let's see. Okay. Let's see if we can get a little bit more light. Okay. So we've got this little cup piece, which just rolls these contacts back and forth. Now, you can't see the voltmeter, but that would go to 0 because this is a piece of solid metal. So on the inside, you can see there's a terminal on one side that connects to one screw. It is not connected to this terminal on the other side. But what does happen is when the switch is in the off position, you have a not connected terminal, and this little brass thing that isn't connected to anything. Turn the switch to the on position, it rolls into place, and it contacts both ends. And so what's going on here is that for some reason we are not getting contact from one side to the other. And let's see if we can figure out why. Most of the time when you've got a situation like this, what you'll find is that the contacts just aren't very clean, and sometimes you'll find out that there's a little bit of wear because of course there's moving parts and it might not be moving all of the way to get it to contact. So that's my theory behind it. What we're going to do first though is we're going to keep drilling these out just a little bit so we can get rid of these rivets. We're going to put a couple of small screws back in their place. Just want that to be large enough to be able to punch it through. Smaller punch. There's one side and the other now. Trying to do this so you can see, but it makes it a little bit more awkward for the doer. These we can get rid of. They're not important except to hold it together. Now what we're going to start with is just cleaning these pieces up. So a scouring pad works wonders for that. And keep in mind, my Austin Healey is a 62, so it's 2023. This switch was built at least 61 years ago, and given that, it's held up remarkably well, because I don't think this has ever been apart before. Okay, we have a nice new roller. And if you're going to take apart a switch, a Dremel is an awesome tool. In fact, it's just as good of an idea to take out the screws. Clean up that area as well, because this is where the wire is going to be connected to, so you want that to be making good contact. Now that is, of course, the bare minimum, but if you're a perfectionist, you may as well just clean up the whole thing. Clean up the screw head too. That shouldn't technically matter, but if nothing else, then when I put my voltmeter on it, I'll know for sure I'm making good contact there. Okay, so now what we've got are two clean contacts. In fact, before we put them back together, there's one other thing. You should try to have some dielectric grease on hand. And what this is going to do is to protect this from corrosion in the future. It's not going to prevent electrical contact, but it will prevent water from getting in and mucking it up later. So after you've cleaned your parts, you want to put a little bit of dielectric grease on them. A little goes a long way, and that's going to help prevent future problems. Of course, you want to keep a rag around just to keep your fingers clean. Okay. All right, that's one. Now we've got the bar that makes contact here. Any switch is going to operate in some similar fashion to this. Whether it's AC, DC, doesn't matter. What you've got is a moving part on the inside that, when the switch is off, does not make contact. When the switch turns back on, it will again. And that's all that it's doing. Now, let's talk a second about the spring. Sometimes the spring gets weak over time and doesn't put enough pressure on the little bar, and so You might get a bad contact just from a weak spring. So what I like to do is just gently stretch it back out. Don't break it, of course, like I almost just did. Stretch it back out just a little bit. And that might help to restore some of the springiness, so to speak. Okay, that's got a little divot in it, and so it goes one direction here. And the spring. It may be counterintuitive, but off is this way and on is this way, even though it's going to be kind of flipping back and forth. That's part of what helps the switch to keep in place. Anyway, you want your two insulating bits. Oh, before I get this far, hang on. I have this temporary clamp here to keep it together while I go and find a screw. Want your two insulators to be in place, and you need that ball to fit in. So that everything works when you get it back together. Okay, temporarily clamp it in place here. Let's make sure that it works. Oh, the beeping works now, okay. Switch is in the off position. There should be no current going through. Switch goes on. Still not working. Okay, we're missing something. I wonder if that's probably got something to do with it. I think we found where this missing piece goes. Switches are going to have springs and such inside of them, so be prepared to hold things together. Okay, let's try this again. Switch is off, shouldn't be anything. Switch is on. I made a nice click. And there we have it. Goes down to 0. This switch works. Shut it back off. Should do nothing. And another test. And there we have it. Of course, we forgot to put this in, but that's okay. We're going to use a little bit of showbiz magic to reassemble this. Now we're going to go find a couple of bolts that go through there because I don't have a rivet that's long enough for that. Okay, quick trip to the hardware store, and I found these 2 millimeter screws, and so I think that'll work. And I'm going to have them go through this direction, because if it sticks out a little farther on this side of the screw, it shouldn't really matter. Washer. The only problem with really small hardware is you've got to have a lot of finesse to actually get it to assemble. Oops. Really, it just takes some patience. Okay, so now it's held in place by 2 screws. Technically, what I probably ought to have done is put a little lock washer underneath, a split washer of some kind, but that's okay. Let's test and make sure this works. Okay. Switch in the off position. Nothing. Flip it on and so try and get it actually. There we go. Flip it on and we're at 0. So off, nothing. On, 0. We're good. There we go. Off and on. Should last for another 60 years. Okay, so just one additional note here. I did go back and I put some thread locker on the threads here. You could use a split washer, lock nut, anything like that will be just fine, and probably isn't a bad idea, but at the very least, get some thread locker on there. You don't want the nut to come apart because then the switch is going to start to undo itself. And you just want to avoid any potential for electrical contact somewhere where it's not supposed to happen. So that's basically it there. But outside of that, I will note that a switch like this is exactly the same concept as most switches that you're going to find. So the headlight switch, for example, Lucas, or actually I think it's a switch made by Clear Hooters in a TR6. That switch is notorious for just failing to work. And so it's going to be the same thing on the inside. You're going to have the switch externally is going to just have a rocker on the inside that's going to either move contacts away from or towards the connections. Even a hazard light switch, granted it's a bit more complicated, you're moving current from one set of contacts to another set and turning on the different flasher circuit, but same thing. You're just moving power from one area to another, and in the case of most switches, it's moving it from being disconnected to just connecting the 2 parts. But all of the switches in your dash are going to be the same. So if you want to keep it either original, if that's important to you and you want to use the original switch, all of these can be repaired as long as the plastic's not broken, and even then, really, you can get some super glue, put it back together if you needed to. Turn signal switches, the dip dimmer switch on the steering column. It's all the same concept. You just have to find out how it comes apart. Usually it's a couple of rivets that hold it together. In this case, anyway, it was. And just be careful not to lose springs and take it apart in order. Just keep all of the pieces together. And when you get it back together, test it with a voltmeter, make sure that it works. And in order to do that, you just have to understand where the wires would plug in. A wiring diagram can help you, but most of the time it's pretty simple. You get power going in, power coming out, and with this switch, it doesn't even matter which one's which. You could have the positive wire go to one side or the other. You could reverse them. It won't matter because all this is doing is connecting or disconnecting it. So there's not really a wrong way to wire it up. But anyway, that's it. So we have a working switch. I might just put that back in the car because this is slightly longer, I found, than the replacement part that I used, and I like that a little bit better. There you have it. If you've got any questions, post them in the comments below. Otherwise, like, subscribe, all that jazz. We'll work on something else next week.